Countdown. Amazing.
I feel like my camera angle on these live shows is always really bad, but I don't know how to fix it, guys, because
it's awkward because I feel
need
like
to look down, but
Yeah.
also I'm not going to get that angle that's, that front-facing camera angle. You guys aren't ready to see that.
nobody's ready. It's live. Are you dropping the link into Discord, or do you?
If you could, because usually I have a hard time finding the link on my own channel.
Hang on
if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. My computer's like teetering on a stack of books I never hauled on my channel.
Oh yeah,
that was one of those videos that I planned to do.
I've got mine is resting on my copy of Helter Skelter.
Oh, amazing. Okay. Book.
I just recently rebought that book, and I've been like low-key obsessed with it. True crime, that is a genre we need to do.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I was typing.
You're good. Because I have like kind of a mixed relationship with true crime, but like just kind of like rereading the beginning of Helter Skelter again, it made me realize like how much the genre does have to offer for certain things. I think it's definitely been. I definitely think it's been like voyeurized in a certain way.
I think so. Remember we talked about. Oh my gosh, what was that book?
Oh, After the Eclipse by Sarah Perry.
No, the other. We didn't pick it.
Oh yeah. That was the one where the guy was like doing that kind of like meta analysis of.
It was the Maura.
Hey guys.
Maura Murray case.
Hey Amy. Hi Heidi. I don't. Sometimes.
Hello, friends.
I hope my comment section is like updating in real time. Sometimes I feel like there's a delay on StreamYard.
I think for the beginning there is, because it feels like I know people are there, but there's a long time for the comments to come in. What the heck was that book called? That's going to drive me nuts.
It's going to drive me nuts as well. But if you guys listening to now or listening later have recommendations for true crime books that we should read, let us know, because that is definitely a genre I would like to explore further.
True Crime Addict.
Oh yeah, that was it.
Yeah, and there was some commentary about, because I think it does talk about the kind of skeezier side of true crime.
Yeah,
and that was the thing. I don't know. I just didn't want to like promote it if it was not good.
Yeah, but rereading Helter Skelter is like it's really getting me into the true crime jazz.
I've been listening to a podcast like nonstop. I can't listen to it at night, like late at night. But it's just True Crime Garage, I think. It's just like two guys that do like, it's like 2 episodes a week, and they like I think literally sit in a garage and drink beer and talk true crime. And I was a little bit worried when I first started with them, because I thought it would be a little bit, I was like, I don't know what these guys look like. I am kind of assuming that they're like older white guys, and I was a little bit concerned about how they were going to deal with certain topics. But so far they've been like pretty, like they don't pull their punches or anything, but I would say they're pretty respectable. I wouldn't be listening if they weren't, and they cover tons and tons of cases.
The only like true crime podcast I really got into. Well, I got really into Serial, but I think I talked about it.
Yeah,
I think I talked about it with you before. That like I had the opposite than intended reaction to Serial, where I was like, "This guy did it! Like he's so guilty, and there's this crowd of sympathy for him, and he definitely killed his girlfriend." But then I also got really into this podcast. I think it was just called Criminal.
Oh yeah. It's by This American Life, like that grouping, right?
I don't know. I think these guys were Australian.
Oh, okay. Different one.
And they did a whole 3-part episode series on these serial killers in England. And the name of these people I cannot remember, but it was a husband-wife duo that were killing children. And I feel like it must have been a very famous serial killers in England, because like she became like the most hated woman in England. Because she was like helping her children like rape and kill children, and they were like burying their bodies in the moors of England. It's the most horrifying 3 hours you will ever listen to in your entire life. I literally could not. Is that the name of the couple, the Wests, Amy?
I do think American serial killers overshadow. I think partly because of volume. It's like something about it feels uniquely American, but yeah, I don't know enough about other countries. Yes,
that was it. Brady and Hindley. That was the couple. I have never listened to anything more horrifying. Like I thought I remember like after I got done listening to the podcast, I had to let my dog outside, and this was when I was living in an apartment, and so I had to like walk her outside at like midnight, and I I was like, I'm gonna pass out from fear. Like I am literally there. I'm gonna pass out outside my apartment right now.
I was gonna say, tell your dog you're peeing inside today. Like we're gonna figure it out.
Yes, Ian Bradley and Moira Hindley, the Moores murders, truly horrific. Yeah, what they were up to was quite devastating.
Oh god, I'm alarmed now. The thing about the True Crime Garage that I find the most terrifying, and then we'll talk about the book, is depending on the episode, they always do like a kind of cold open, and they have like a narrated introduction to the case kind of thing. But sometimes they replace that with the 911 call if it's worth listening to.
Oh.
And there was one, and I forget, it was in the American South or in, I don't know, I'm going to get that wrong. Anyway, there's like a 12-year-old girl who is making this 911 call, and everybody around her, they're at like a bowling alley, and everybody around her has been shot, and so has she. But this is being like revealed over the course of the 911 call. Like people have broken in, put all the staff in, like the bowling alley staff in this office, and these kids happen to be there like with their parents on a Saturday morning or whatever. And you hear her like making oh my God, it was like the most harrowing 4-minute open to a podcast I've ever listened to. Like it was just, there's something so visceral about hearing those actual recordings that I'm just like, oh God, I can't handle it. Like she's, I mean, literally saved people's lives. It's incredible.
That's insane. Oh, not much of a segue here, guys, but we're going to be talking...
How we got onto true crime right away?
It was because we started talking about how true crime was a genre we wanted to do for the podcast.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, no, there's a connection.
Not the podcast, the book club. Podcasts are on my mind because true crime is often podcasts.
Yeah.
So we are talking today about the memoir Priestdaddy by Patricia Lockwood. Now I'm going to make a very embarrassing confession for everybody here. When Jessica brought this memoir up, I definitely had it confused with the novel Fire Sermon by Jamie Quattrell.
Which I've read.
And I was like, because I remember you and I were talking, we're like, well, there's some salacious bits in this memoir, so maybe we should look it up. And I was dead ass thinking that it was about a woman who had an affair with a priest. And nothing could be further from the truth.
I mean, somebody had relations with the priest in the book. It's the whole conceit of it, I guess. But.
Yes. But I think, I think obviously the title is a little bit salacious and funny, and that somehow I got those two books mixed up in my brain. Probably because they were like kind of big, buzzy books around the same time, which was like 2017.
Yeah.
Or 2018. So this memoir is about the fact that Patricia Lockwood, who became internet famous in the like late 2000s, early 2010s on Twitter for her kind of like bizarro comedy and poetry, her father is a Catholic priest. He converted to Catholicism after he had already had a wife and kids. He converted because of the horror of the film The Exorcism. And he gets special permission. Was it from the Pope or from some very high bishop? I cannot remember which. To become a priest, despite the fact that he is married and has children and is obviously not going to remain celibate. And this book is primarily about her relationship with her parents. It's about growing up in this very religious household that is both very traditional in its beliefs, but also very untraditional in its structure and their relationship to the church. It is also about the fact that she and her husband end up having to move back in with her parents into the rectory after her husband loses a part of his eyesight and is no longer able to continue his work in the newspapers. And he now has to, find ways to make money differently, and they have to move back into this rectory. And this book is very comedic in its tone. The comedy kind of never stops. The tone of the book is a little bit relentless at times, in ways that I think are successful and unsuccessful. We can get into that later. And this book examines basically all aspects of her current relationship with her parents, her former relationship with her parents. It's, there's a lot of really meaty stuff that gets handled in this book, but it's all kind of handled with a somewhat flippancy and sarcasm that can either be read as endearing or maybe might put some people off. So what were your reactions, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about, I guess, with what you've just said. So I really like the book just generally, I will say. I think the writing was excellent. And I think she definitely has a very specific tone and style of storytelling that as I was reading through, and you guys were reading through the book and posting on Discord, I know some people got along with better than others. And I think it's one of those styles where you like it or you don't really get on with it. But her ability to like point out the absurd of everyday life, like there will be moments where something really serious is happening and she is that person. She talks a lot about, I think in interviews and in the book as well, about kind of being an outsider, being an observer her whole life, and how that has led into her writing in a lot of ways. But yeah, her ability to like be in a normal situation and just see the absurdity around her and kind of make commentary on that, I think is really what makes the book successful for me, because she does kind of have this. I read a couple of interviews after, because there's some things about the book that I was like, I wasn't 100% sure what her intention was in writing the book. And I was trying to figure out through interview a little bit what she was trying to go for. But she talks a lot about how like chaotic her whole life was, or how, what's the word I'm trying to say? Like everything, like you said, there's that dichotomy between this very traditional, conservative, focused lifestyle that her parents now are into, and like that is how they live their life. And then she is obviously sort of the opposite. And so we have these like opposites living under the same roof and trying to parse through life. And it leads to this absurdist comedy in a lot of ways, which I thought was really interesting.
And there's definitely like, she responds to her parents oftentimes in very sarcastic ways. She's very flippant oftentimes about their beliefs, but never in a way that seems mean-spirited or in a way that causes like a lot of conflict between the two. They also kind of just seem to accept and live with these two attitudes living under the same roof. And there was a part of me that really related to a lot in this book. I wasn't Catholic, but I definitely grew up quite religious. And, you know, I think that, you know, any type of religious upbringing has a lot of very similar like patterns of behavior that take place in households and stuff like that are instantly recognizable and familiar. And the way she kind of picks those apart is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I like that there's moments where she's going back in time, certainly, and talking about, you know, when she was a toddler and she went to like an anti-abortion march, that kind of thing.
That chapter was probably the most interesting to me.
Yeah, well, there's that kind of mixture too between, you know, our modern day setting is her as an adult. I mean, she's young, but she's married with her husband. They both live there. She's capable. She's had all these other life experiences and is capable of having her own beliefs and making her own decisions. But she does a lot of flashbacks throughout where she's a child, and that independence is just not there yet, right? She's much more subject to her parents' decisions and lifestyle choices.
And I also, you know, the way that these beliefs of her parents get misinterpreted by her childhood mind and then warped into things that are different. Like, for example, when they're at the abortion clinic doing the protest and, you know, her mom explains to them these people are killing babies, and she's convinced that this means that they're going to try and murder her baby brother. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's this, it's like kind of comical and absurd, and also really dark, because for the child, right? I mean, that you can look at that fear and kind of laugh at it now, right? But for the child in the moment, that's a horrifying thought. I mean, that's terrifying. You know, to place yourself back in that childhood space. So yeah, there's a lot of that handled in this book. I will say about this book, I started off really loving it. Like, I remember I read the first 5 chapters and I was like, this is brilliant. In particular, I really liked her take in the beginning on kind of like her life on the internet, right? There was a lot of that in the beginning, her life on Twitter, all this different stuff. And that pretty much went away completely by the end of the book. Like, that quit being a topic of conversation. And I actually thought that was probably one of the more interesting aspects of the book for me. And then I guess this book just started to wear me down a little bit as it went on. Like, I felt like after essay after essay after essay, the tone remained so consistent, a little bit relentless. And I kind of got to the end of the book and really kind of questioned what exactly at the end of the day I was supposed to take away from these interlinked essays. Because this is like a memoir and interlinked essays. You could easily, I think, read each of these chapters as a standalone. And, you know, I mean, obviously some context is given between other chapters, like who is the seminarian living in the rectory and stuff like that. I don't know, though. Like, I just kind of found it, like,
Yeah, I mean, I
relentless.
agree. Yeah, so last week when I was like, oh crap, I haven't finished reading the book yet, and then we didn't do the live show last week, I was like, I literally put the book down and be like, don't need to finish this today, and like did something else because I agree. When I first started reading it, the first couple chapters was like a revelation. I loved her style. I love the way I love writers who can point out something that you have seen or heard a million times and say it kind of differently. Like I love all of that. But I think I don't read a ton of funny books. And it's the same with sitcoms. If you like binge a sitcom on Netflix, it's really funny for a while. And then it sort of just gets a little bit like, it's a little much. And so we've talked so many times in this book club about our reading pace because of the structure of book club and the way we have things set up and how that impacts our reading. And in this case, I really did spread it out more than other books maybe. And I'm kind of glad I did because like you said, I could come at it and say, okay, I'm reading a chapter and it's like a standalone essay. And I still remember the stuff that's come before it. So if I need to, kind of have a piece of knowledge from a previous chapter, that's fine. But I didn't feel the need to constantly be reading it over, like a short period of time. So that kind of worked out well for me. But yeah, it could be a little much, I think, all in one go. And I do wonder if that's, she's would call herself a poet first and certainly published works like collections of poetry before this one. And it was funny. One of the interviews I read, she apparently the title Priestdaddy, her and her husband had as like a running joke that if things ever got really dire, they would write, like she would write a memoir called Priestdaddy about her life, because her life was like, if anybody has a memoir in their childhood, it was maybe her, just with how different her upbringing was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they got to living with her parents and were really struggling to think, how are we going to get back out and independent and everything, that's when it all started. Like the title was kind of a bit of a running joke, but it was her first attempt at writing a longer form. Now, she has just published a novel this past month, I think, which I have checked out from the library. But she, like this is not her, like long form writing was not where she came from. And I wonder if that essay style and chunking it out helped her in some way with the structure of everything.
Yeah. So I want to pull up Zan and Amy's comments about the end of the book. Yep. Definitely starting to get a lot more morose, still funny, but with a lot of tragedy underneath it. I totally agree. Yep. Especially in the end, as it's kind of getting to the part about how she's going into her new house, moving away from her parents again. In a lot of ways, almost like a second adolescence, I guess, for lack of a better word. And she's drawing a lot of these parallels about her own relationship with writing and how it mimics some of the religious elements of her father. And then talking about how her father never really presents himself, right? Never really shows this kind of like human side to him. And he does kind of remain this caricature throughout the entire book, to be honest. I never really felt like I truly understood him on a human level in a lot of ways. He always definitely felt like this caricature, and I think he feels like that to her as well. Like I don't think that is a misrepresentation or an unwillingness on her part to write honestly about him. And I found those chapters quite sad, and I found those elements of the book quite sad, because I think her father would not be somebody who I would want to be friends with. She would not be somebody I would want to be friends with either, to be honest. I mean, she's on an energy level that's like 100 times past what I can possibly stand in a conversation. But I still felt bad that this was in some ways kind of their relationship, which felt both honest and superficial all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interview chunks that I read, they were talking about her father and how he's portrayed. And she's giving an interview to the press here, so take it for what you want to. But she made a comment about how, people in her life that she knows that have read the book thought that she even downplayed him. Like that he was even more kind of zany, over the top, had his own quirks. And I think it's interesting, people who choose to write memoir. I remember, I think it was Fee in the Discord at one point said it's really hard, like in a book club setting, especially, or to talk about it now, to talk about like judging people's lives. Because in any other book, we would pick apart the characters and kind of judge the characters, And in a memoir, she is putting people on the page to different degrees, right? Her father is on the page a lot. Her mother, perhaps even more so. And so she is presenting her life with her parents, this relationship she has with her parents, her upbringing. And by publishing a memoir about it, it's almost like you're asking to be judged or to judge these people, but that feels like a really unfair like thing. It just seemed bizarre to me because I found him to be like, I would not,
no,
I could not with him. Like, I think I said in the Discord, like, just not wearing pants, like.
Although, okay, I know everyone has harped on this, and like maybe I grew up also dysfunctional or something. My dad always wore pants, but I went to several sleepovers as a kid where the dad just did not wear pants around the house. Like that was just a totally acceptable thing in the Midwest. Like this was all the time.
And maybe, okay, this is totally like, I'm not trying to be judgmental here, because maybe my friends, I never had that experience with anybody. Like, no, none of my friends ever were like, oh yeah, my dad doesn't wear pants.
Yeah, all the time.
Right. But I don't know, maybe it's just like the friends maybe I missed out.
I had a very good friend growing up whose house, like her dad, I don't think her dad ever wore pants. Like, I'm not, like, if he was in the house, he was not wearing pants.
I also just don't understand the impulse, to be clear. Like, I have friends now that are like, when they get home, they take off whatever. And I'm just like, I am more like on the never nude scale of things, right? Where I'm like, I want to be fully clothed all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I instantly take off my jeans because jeans are the devil, and I put on sweatpants, but that's it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I wear like athleisure all day long, but yeah. See, that's the thing. I think this is common, Amy. I don't think it's like, yeah, and Ron too. Like, I agree. I don't think it's that weird, but to me, it felt like the weirdest thing because I'm very like, I don't know, very prudish, I guess. But I'm just like, why wouldn't you just wear clothes in the house? Any clothes? I don't care what they are, but please wear clothes.
Yeah.
I think the thing I wanted to go back to about her father in particular, there's a lot of stuff that like he would do or ways that he would act like constantly like. I'm going to put playing the guitar in air quotes because I don't actually know how successful he was at that instrument. But like, just like being in a room by yourself and making a ton of noise with this instrument, like that's kind of, okay, whatever. That would piss me off, but okay. The thing where he buys a guitar instead of sending her to college,
I know,
felt unforgivable to me. Like that is the epitome of, she's living with her parents again out of necessity. And I get that. And like her husband and her went through a really hard time and kind of needed this time to get themselves back on their feet. And I get that. But to me, that's a deal breaker in a relationship to think that the money was and again, like I live in Canada, our like university finance system is a little bit different. It was relatively easy for me to get a student loan. But I'm just like, to rob your own child of that opportunity was unforgivable, like I said.
See, I know a lot of families like that. Like I felt like there were a lot of areas in this book where I just related very hard to her because maybe the region she came from, obviously, I mean, she was born 2 hours away from where I live.
Right.
She ends up moving all over the place in the Midwest. I think they end up settling in Missouri. But you know, like I think the region I came from, the background I came from, like none of these things were particularly shocking to me. I mean, not that I agree with any of them, but like they were all kind of par for the course, you know? I mean, the dad that's listening to Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly at the same time and getting this kind of like cross noise between the two. I mean, that would drive me insane, but like totally believable. I work in a laboratory and there's a guy, well, Rush Limbaugh's died now, but before Rush Limbaugh died, he would listen to it. No comment on that. He would listen to it like in the laboratory, and this was a guy who was very much her dad's age, right? And so I guess like in a lot of ways, I just kind of feel like there were a lot of aspects of these men who were very much like men I know in my life, that I really understood. But the college thing, like I read it, I was like, I mean, that sucks, but like. Totally see it happening.
And that's the thing is, and I don't mean to say it's like a specifically Midwest thing, because I think that could happen literally anywhere. It just felt like in any family dynamic situation where like if you're not going into a trade, because I think there are exceptions here, right? University degrees are both not what they were in two different ways. Like one, an undergrad is not typically enough anymore, but also like go to college or do a trade instead, because a university degree again is not on its own is not helpful. Like going to college for 2 years and getting a diploma in something that is actually usable is way more helpful to you. So I'm like not trying to make that, but it just felt like, I don't know, like any parent in any situation who prioritizes like I would say a frivolous expense, right? He doesn't need this guitar. It just felt like a parent. I don't feel like parents owe their kid every dollar that they earn, and I don't feel like that needs to be entirely on them. But when the difference is like she thought she was going to college and then isn't, like what the heck?
And that was like our introduction to the character, right? And so I really think that in the beginning I had a really negative perception of him. Like I was like, what an ass. Like I read that scene and I was like, I am so against him. And I think the rest of the book softens him to some extent. And but it softens him by playing up his comical aspects, the parts of him that are absurd. I don't know that it really softens him on the emotional side of things as much as it is kind of like, this is just how he is. You gotta deal with it. And like, for example, at the end of the book when they're on a vacation to the Key West, was it? I can't remember, somewhere in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean,
and her husband go.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, her mom has this conversation with the father, and you're not entirely sure what was said, but obviously he gets mad about something. And you know, she's clearly hurt by it, right? This was probably the most emotional actually you see either of the parents throughout the entire book. And the mom at the end of it is just like, I mean, she deals with her emotions. She's like, well, that's just how he is. You know how he is. He wants me there.
Yeah. And I think you see that in so many relationships, just in general, like marriages over long periods of time in general with, and that's just how he is kind of mentality, which, I mean, people choose to be in marriages or they feel like they can't leave them. Not that I think that their parents were like on the verge of divorce or anything, but it's interesting because I think what, now that we're talking about it, I think the thing for me is that he is meant to be an individual, a person with his own ambitions, his own needs. And I never see him as a father. I see him as like a man who happens to have kids. And it's interesting that we don't see him a ton in his role in the church. Like there's some comments made when they're talking about how they moved around almost specifically in response to the sexual abuse kind of crisis that was happening. That's sort of one of the only really strong connections we get, but we don't ever see what he's like. Like, what is he like with the people who go to his church that he's the priest at? Like, we don't get him in an official capacity hardly ever. He's very much just like the dad with no pants.
Yeah. I mean, you get like, you know, that he writes these kind of like letter responses, like when one of the bishops was forced to step down over, I believe, a child sexual assault incident.
Yeah.
I think the priest that was asked to step down had been involved in the cover up, not the actual assault. You know, we know that he's penning these kind of editorials against it. But we don't really know a whole lot about his role in the church. And Catholicism is very, I'm not going to say the word strange because that sounds worse than what I mean, but it's very unfamiliar to me in the sense that a lot of what is religious and a lot of what is important to them religiously is ceremonial. And it's repetitive, right? I mean, like, you know, you go to the same mass every Sunday, right? Whereas like someone like myself who came from a more Protestant background, that's very odd to me, because like every single sermon was different, right?
Right.
And every single religious gathering was different. And so like, I don't know that we necessarily almost needed to see him in his role in the church, because like, I feel like a Catholic priest's role in the church is a Catholic priest's role in the church is a Catholic priest's role in the church. I mean, obviously there's varying degrees of warmth between priests, and you saw that throughout the book as she kind of mentioned these priests who had been in her life, and their like relationships to the family. But yeah, I wasn't entirely put off by that, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think a couple people are kind of commenting around a thing that I was thinking too, is like, she controls the narrative here, right? She controls what we see and what we don't see. about any member of her family or about
Mm-hmm.
those interactions. So when like Ron was commenting there that she pulled away from what happened in that interaction, like she gets to control how much of that relationship she reveals and how personal. And I wonder too about the kind of forgiving her piece that Amy's talking about. I wonder, she doesn't, one of the questions I had about this book generally, and she talks about it a little bit in the later chapters because her parents know she's writing this book. And clearly the book has been published. From what I understand, her mom had not, again, this is from interviews a few years ago, her mom hadn't read it, but Patricia had read a couple like excerpts out to her mom. I don't know if her father's ever read it. And I guess my question was a little bit like, you're really putting your family and the way that they live their life out there for people to judge, right? Like, I don't know that you read this book and don't have a feeling about it, right? And I wonder what her purpose was there. Was it just because she had this kind of crazy upbringing and it's interesting and people want to read about it? Because I think that's true. But it's interesting to me that she would, like, what is, at the end of the day, like now in the year 2021, what is her relationship with her parents after writing this? Because I don't think it's all, like she's not portraying them all in a bad light. I think she's just portraying, like you said, Chris, like, you know, these kinds of people, like she's just kind of saying how it was, but she gets to control that narrative a bit too. And I felt like as I was reading it, I was like, she was saying specific things, like I remember the rag on the sink, right? I'm like, oh my God,
yeah.
like she's really sharing a lot of information about her family with people who are going to judge. And what is the purpose?
But you know what? I don't think that she wrote anything down in this book that she wouldn't have said to their faces.
I
Because
don't think so either.
she's incredibly honest with them about how she feels about things, and she's very honest about her attitude towards kind of their opinions and beliefs, which is very flippant and very sarcastic. And you know, she makes a joke out of absolutely everything.
Yeah, but what does she need from her parents? Like, as parents, there's a couple moments where she talks about how she can rely on her mom, right? Her mom would drive anywhere, would show up in the middle of the night if you needed her to, and kind of celebrating her mom for that kind of mentality. And then talking about her relationship with her father, like, even though they disagree on many things, you know, to what extent does she still need him to be a dad? Like, I find that question, and I don't need an answer from her on that. Like, that's so personal, but I find it interesting, you know?
And also there was a comment too that kind of relates back to this. I wish I could scroll up and find it, but that'll take me too long. But the Zayn brought up the fact that the way the information was doled out about the family was very strange. Like, you didn't know that she had brothers until like 2/3 of the way through the book. When she brought up her sister for the first time, which was nearly halfway through the book, I was like, whoa, there's a sister? Like, in my mind, she was an only child, because the only people she had brought up in that narrative were her parents and herself. And if she had briefly mentioned the siblings, I certainly didn't pick up on it, you know? And like, yeah, the whole way that this family is portrayed is very controlled and also very oddly structured. Because I was really kind of blown away by the fact that she had a sister, and not just one sister. She has, like, I think 2 sisters, 2 brothers.
It's like a big family.
It's a big family, yeah.
And that van, I forget the name of it, like, honestly, but that van killed me.
Where it was some hip hop artist had renovated it. Yeah, I thought it was really funny.
It's like the church family van.
Yeah, but I mean, like, to be honest, the entirety of her family, I don't think I could spend an evening with them. Like, even her sister, who seems like probably one of the more sane members of the family, I was like, I would kill this woman. Like, I would not do well in a social interaction with her.
No, and I think that's kind of the thing, is like the whole time I was reading it, kind of like, oh my God, like I could not.
Yeah, they're just very, I don't know how to describe
there's a lot going on.
Of people, but there's a certain manic energy to nearly every one of these people. You know, I mean, there is even her, you know, who is probably the more reserved socially. I mean, she spends most of her time indoors reading books with a seminarian. What does come out of her mouth, though, is just like kind of absurd and, you know, off the wall, and, you know, at the highest emotional states in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Even if she's delivering it with this kind of deadpan attitude.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think sort of the way she sees things is what makes her successful as a writer in general. Like her ability to see things in a kind of different light, or to poke fun at an absurd moment that somebody else might not have caught. Like I do think that it can be exhausting, but also like is what makes her successful to me. Because I definitely, and it'd be interesting to read. I don't know if anybody that's watching has read her novel yet. I've had it checked out for a couple weeks now. I have this week off. I'm on vacation next week, so I'm going to read it.
I think it's quite experimental from what I've heard.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know how I'm going to get on with it, but I'm wondering in terms of her writing style, because she's writing a work of fiction here. Now, it is quite short-ish, but, you know, I wonder how some of that translates to how she writes fiction, where she's not portraying a real person, and she's going to be a little bit more concerned, I would assume, with crafting a narrative structure as opposed to kind of the in-your-face constant punching, and I mean that in a good way, of her nonfiction and her poetry.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I agree. And I think the novel deals a lot more with internet culture, right? Because it's about a woman who's like, what is the like internet app called that she's like on all the time, like the Abyss or something? It's given some sort of weird like nickname that's obviously meant to be Twitter. And actually, I would be more interested in that because I wanted her to examine more of internet culture, right? I mean, Patricia, I had forgotten who Patricia Lockwood was after like. I mean, I knew about the poem "Rape Joke" because I remember when that became like a viral hit.
Yeah.
And I think I had seen her tweets like in 2011, 2012 at some point, kind of floating around, kind of like on the same level as like that Megan Amram woman, you know, where it's like these just like absurdist comedy tweets. So like I had seen her around, but I never paid any attention really. I had no concept of her as being like as internet famous as she clearly was. And I found those aspects of the book as she was examining like Twitter culture probably the most interesting. And one of the passages that I marked because like I absolutely loved it was when she was talking about how they raised the money for her husband's eye surgery. And she says the internet addicts somehow banded together and raised the money in less than 12 hours. Their sense of humor had not abated. They gave in increments of $4.20, $6.66, $69.69, and they gave under usernames like Guild Burpedo and Pleasure_Stepdad. The jokes were gifts too. Everyone gave. Students, rich people, a man who had written a television show about an island, and a dancer called Bubbles, who donated all her tips from that night, and a comedian whose chest hair looked like 3 otters engaging in a leisurely orgy while floating up the river of his torso. It was people I knew and people I didn't know. It was so total and unexpected I couldn't look at it directly, as if generosity itself had opened up its trench coat and flashed me. Jason shook me awake that morning to tell me to call off the fundraiser. We had raised enough. It was his 30th birthday and he was crying. Like the way that interrogates these absurdist parasocial relationships that we form on the internet. And to a degree, like I have lived my life on the internet, like an embarrassing amount. You know, and to like see that kind of like portrayed in such a sincere and yet comical way was one of the best parts of the book. And it was one of the things I really thought was going to get explored in this book. And then it just totally drops off. Like her Twitter presence, the idea of her being this kind of like, you know, platform of social media user, all of that is completely gone. I mean, by a third of the way through the book. And I just found that so disappointing because I just thought there was so much to say there. And obviously that was not the book she was trying to write. She was trying to write this book about her dad.
Sure. Yeah.
But man, I wanted that.
Well, I do find it interesting. I remember when Hank Green published his first novel and now he has a second. And he's one of those people who has a massive voice on the internet, lives his life on the internet in a variety of platforms. And what he has to say in a fictional novel about living your life on social media, I find the most interesting because these people have so much experience with it and they always have interesting things to say about it. And I do take your point there. Like that's a nice, and especially when this would have happened, when this fundraiser would have happened, like this wasn't the era of every time something happened to somebody, there was a GoFundMe created, right? Like there wasn't that culture, but it really gets at the idea that, you know, it's like a ragtag band of misfits came together and raised this money. And I mean, she's clearly pulling out specific examples from the pool of people. But, you know, that's one of the things that the internet has been absolutely, like in my mind, amazing for is creating communities out of people all over the world with, you know, the one thing that all of these people have in common in this moment is that they follow Patricia Lockwood on Twitter, right? Like
exactly.
that's literally the community that's been built there. And I think, I mean, you and I have both noticed, we were talking before we started here about YouTube and creating communities and that kind of thing, and small communities, big communities, it doesn't matter. You know, like there's people who, you know, may have some overlapping interests that they won't even know are overlapping interests, because the one thing they have in common is that they watch your videos or watch my videos or whatever, right? Like there's something so amazing about the internet's capacity to do that. And I do wish I think too, like she's transitioning because the point of the book is something different, but I would love to get a collection of essays from her about like living your life online kind of thing. That would be so interesting.
Exactly. And also I would love to know how she learned to write. Like this is maybe dumb, but like the idea that she doesn't have anything past a high school education is kind of crazy to me, because the writing in here, I mean, for all the issues we might have about the relentlessness of the tone and that type of thing as the book goes on, I think that's just a consequence of the length of the book than it is anything else. But like the actual writing itself is razor sharp, and you know, like I would love to know, like I don't know, like her process,
just how she puts a sentence together, right?
Because like there's an aspect of this book where I'm like, I cannot believe that you didn't go to college, you know, and not that college is the end all be all of education, but it was just shocking.
It's just uncommon, I think, too, to have people of her fame at this point who have really successful published works. I mean, we more so, I guess, notice the people that don't because it's talked about, right? It's talked about that she doesn't have that education, whatever, because so many people do. And writing is one of those examples where you could have a real conversation about, is it required? Because clearly there's super successful people who can figure this out on their own. And there's other people, and I think specifically in fantasy, like we talked about Sanderson, we mentioned Sanderson briefly, but there's certain like schools of writing that people go to that really, I do think, help hone their craft. It's helpful to workshop those pieces with other writers and get feedback on them and really like go that route. I don't think there's a one size fits all for writing. It's one of those ones where, you know, I think with a lot of artistic stuff, you could go and get a formal education and be really benefited by that, or you could not and make it on your own and still be really successful. And you get benefits from other things. Like I think, you know, having that Twitter presence and being able to put out really short things and seeing the reaction on them, it's like doing an A/B test on anything, right? You could put out a comment about one thing and then a week later a comment about a similar thing but from a different angle, and you could literally see which one does better. Like I think there's kind of a built-in workshop element to posting stuff on social media, especially in her style, where in this case she's writing a work of nonfiction with clearly humorous insights into things. And like I don't know how much of that she did, but she could, right? Like there's different paths to achieve the same results, I think.
Yeah, but I would like to hear what her take on it is.
Oh, for sure.
That was the one aspect of the book not the one, but that was one of the aspects of the book that really stuck out to me, and I kind of kept going back to as I was reading it. Was I just couldn't believe that, you know, someone had taught themselves to write this way, had inserted themselves into literary communities this way, without having.
And I think in a really organic way.
Usually, results in that pipeline.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would say that I would recommend this book to people who love memoirs. I don't know that I would recommend this book to somebody who didn't love memoirs. I think it definitely has its own flaws. I think that it could have been, I just feel like a through line could have been better implemented into it.
And again, that my desire to know what her intention was, right? That could be the through line.
Yeah.
I felt like she was trying to make a point, but I didn't necessarily know what it was. And then maybe jokes on me because there's no point, and that's fine too.
It did do the one thing that I hate in memoirs like this, and I don't know why this bothers me so much, but when you get to the point in the memoir where she's talking about writing the memoir, every time I get to that part in a memoir, I'm just like, shoot me. Like there's nothing I care about less than you trying to write this book. And it happens, I feel like, in a lot of these kind of poppy memoirs, because while this is examining a childhood, there's also a certain element of it that is quite pop cultural.
Yep.
And a lot of these poppy memoirs I find this element is just a constant, and I do not like it.
I wonder if it's a little bit like trying to justify why she wrote the memoir. Like, in that everybody lives a life, and I'm sure that any single person could find an element of their life that could be made into a memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not get published, it may not sell 1 million copies or whatever the thing is going to be, but like everybody has a story. This sounds so freaking cheesy, but everybody has a story that they could tell in this format. So I wonder sometimes when they go into that, why I'm writing this memoir piece, it's like a self-justification for the book, because it is. I feel like writing a memoir is almost one of the most self-indulgent, and I don't mean that in the negative connotation that I think it often gets, but by its nature, it is all about you, right? It is self-indulgent, and I wonder if they just get into their head that they need to justify the why of it. I find that interesting.
Or like, the only time I've ever seen it handled in a way that I kind of liked was in Jeannie Vanasco's memoir, The Glass Eye. I don't know if any of you guys have ever read it. If I remember, it's been years since I read it, so I'm trying to remember. But at the beginning of every one of her chapters in that book, there was this like brief paragraph-long thing about whether or not she was trying to, what she was trying to do with the memoir, and like whether or not she should have gone about it a different way. Like, if I had written it this way, blah, 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 would have been like the consequences. And I actually kind of liked that, just because it was kind of built into the structure of the memoir, rather than it's like, oh, we're getting to the end of the book, now it's time to talk about publishing this book. Which seems to be kind of like the way it typically goes with a lot of these stuff, and I just don't like it.
Yeah, it's... I guess I don't read enough. Yeah, Ron's famous.
Ron, famous? You're way more famous than any of us on here. Yeah. We are in the midst of a celebrity.
Yep. There was, I think, Amy, to both of your points there. I mean, the discussion about the chapter and like when things were dire, she was eventually going to write this memoir called Priestdaddy. Yeah. Like, that certainly kind of says something about the state she was in, that she's like, I need to write a book. I need to sell a book. And oh my God, my dog's going to knock over the lamp. Okay. Oh my gosh, that was scary. But yeah, that kind of like, okay, I need to find material now. I need to sell this thing. And this is going to be our ticket out of this house or this rectory, you know? His book didn't do that great. Okay, well, you're a minor celebrity. Still famous.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely think there was an aspect of this book where it was definitely a memoir for memoir's sake in a certain extent, which is fine. Like, and there's definitely interesting stuff to parse out through this, but this is definitely a book I would give to somebody who loves memoirs. I don't know that I would recommend this to somebody who, like, this is not the memoir I would give to somebody to get them interested in
convince them. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is one of those cases where, like, how many priests do you know that have a wife and kids kind of thing? Yeah. Like, it is it's a built-in story, and the fact that her upbringing was this absurd in moments, I think, only kind of seals the deal on it being kind of worthy of story.
Yeah, completely agree.
My dog's losing his marbles.
Well, as far as this book, do you have anything kind of major to add to this?
I don't really. I mean, I'm glad I read it. I had been meaning to for a long time. I had a couple of friends who read this book when it came out and loved it and raved about it. And I've been meaning to read it for a long time. And so this was kind of like a nice excuse for me to finally get to it. And I ended up really enjoying it. But I do think that parceling it out into manageable chunks for me helped. Just like... I like you said, that relentless tone definitely stands with me. And I don't think it's the fault of the book. I think that's her style. It's just that if you read it all in a couple of days, it can feel like a lot. But because I spread it out, I don't think I noticed it as much until you pointed it out. But yeah, like, I really liked it. I like her style. Like, I got along really well with her humor. And I like that darker humor at times. That doesn't bother me ever. So yeah, I liked it.
My only final word on the subject would be I did a mixture of audiobooking and reading, and I do not recommend the audiobook. So she narrates the audiobook. So when I first started reading this book, when I was reading the book, I found it riotously funny, like with my eyes. Like, I was laughing. You talk about somebody who has absolutely no sense of timing when they're actually speaking a joke.
Oh, dear.
Like, it was like,
that's rough. Because for memoir is one of the only times where I would say I really like getting the author to read it. Like, in fiction, almost definitely not. In other nonfiction,
Maybe other people would disagree with me. I found her delivery of these jokes when she was talking in the audiobook to be painful. Whereas if I had been reading them, I would have found them funny. I would have been thinking about how they should be read aloud. And I would, try to say, like, I could have imagined the timing, which is infinitely better than her timing.
Oh dear. That's not great.
I don't recommend the audiobook. Maybe other people disagree with me, but yeah.
It's such a personal thing, but
yeah, I mean, all audio narrations kind of are. Yeah, definitely a book. I would say this is a solid 3.5-star book. I would recommend it to people who like memoirs. This is not the book that would convince people, I think, who are on the edge about wanting to read a memoir or nonfiction.
Well, and I think a memoir too, like, talk about personal taste, right? Like, finding a memoir written on a subject you already enjoy, I think, is kind of the more key thing. But yeah, I don't even know what I would pick actually as like my intro to memoir for somebody who doesn't. Do you tell me?
Well, massive trigger warning for it. It was the book I mentioned to you earlier before we started it, the live show, After the Eclipse by Sarah Perry, which is a different Sarah Perry than the English novelist. This is the American Sarah Perry. It's a memoir about the fact that her mother was murdered in her house while she was asleep. She was 12 years old. She was the only witness to the murder. And the book itself is not actually about the murder. It's about like her relationship.
That's what makes it successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about her relationship with her mother before and after the incident. And it's about what happens to her when she has to like leave her family. She ends up kind of getting passed around between different family members. And it's about her relationship with her mother's murder, and in particular, the way this murder has been portrayed in media and all this different stuff. And it becomes this kind of like meta-analysis on true crime. Yeah. It's an amazing memoir. Like, it
was so good.
It's one of the best. It's one of the best things I've ever read in my life.
And I think for people like me who are interested in true crime, but are always, I think, aware that it can so easily tip into inappropriate or, what's the word I'm looking for? That thing where you like see a car. Yeah, voyeuristic, I would say. Just kind of gross interest in it. It's literally the book about a crime that is nothing about the crime.
Yeah.
Certainly it has an impact on her life, and she talks about the impact on her. And there's a couple things, like, it's not like her mother gets murdered and you never follow the investigation or the case, right? There are a couple things there. Like, she doesn't leave you hanging because you don't want to Google it afterwards.
Yeah, but, I've got that one on my shelf, Amy. I need to read it.
Oh yeah, I've heard a couple people talk about that one. I don't read a ton of memoir, and typically when I do, I enjoy it. So it's one of those, like, why don't I just read more of this? And I mean, I could say that about literally any genre because I read so widely and I never read deeply that there's always so many things. But
yeah, same here.
You want to talk about the Duchess War? Very briefly?
The Duchess War by Courtney Milan is going to be our April pick. I have not started it yet. I need to start it soon. I recently, where did I put it? Oh, it's over there. I purchased a new Kindle.
You're telling me in Boxer.
Yes, I owned a Kindle. Like, I was one of the. Sounds so hipster. I was one of the first people that got. I was one of the first people that got a Kindle. I remember, like, when it first came out, it was a gift. I think my grandmother got it for me. It was certainly not something my parents would have bought for me. I was very young, and I've had that same Kindle since like 2008 or 2009. I can't remember.
Oh, geez, dude.
Yeah, and I remember at the time, like, Kindles were like this thing where it was like, this is going to end the physical book, and like every 10 seconds there was a article, saying that this was the death of paper.
Yeah. It was the death of mass market. It is not the death of physical reading.
No. And so I've had that for 13, 14 years at this point. And I finally replaced it with that stimulus check. Thank you, Biden. So I got a new Kindle, and I'm very excited because it means that I'm going to try and use the Kindle for picking up things that are outside of my comfort zone, including The Duchess War by Courtney Milan. So I feel like a true romance reader because I'm going to be reading an ebook of a romance novel. I'm in the community now. I'm officially a romance.
Oh yeah, you have to read it in digital now. Like that's where romance. It's always our top searching genre at the library. Amy, don't be scared. I mean, I think so. Discord. I only set up the channels last night. I'm sorry for being a little bit late on that. And there's a couple people already that are commenting about one, that they're hooked right from like good start to the characters and the world building. But 2, I think these books read so fast that you like, I literally read these, like typically I would read them in an afternoon, like in a couple of hours.
Oh, wow.
So,
well, they would have to, because if you ever noticed the people that are like massive romance readers,
they read a billion.
They read like a billion books. They are either all the fastest readers in the world, or these books just read really quickly. Like they
read really quickly, and there is a formula to them. Mm-hmm. And I think when I say that, I always come across as being like negative about it, because we talk about, unexpected twists in books, or fantasy in particular that kind of bucks the trend. But in romance, it's like a mystery book with a detective. There is a formula that is to be followed to some extent, and then the success of the book is more about how the author handles things within that formula. So yeah, exactly, Amy. Like, what they do, what their characters are like, how the dialogue is presented, certainly how the more romantic scenes are handled. I'm sure we're going to get into a discussion on Discord about all the different ways we can describe certain body parts. That'll be fun. But it is a really fast read. So for people that are starting early, you're either going to finish it really early, or I don't know, you're going to have to like.
You've already read this book. So how would you rate it on the steamy scale?
I don't remember. So here's the other thing, right? They all kind of read the same. And so I remember really liking, I think I read most of this series actually. But I don't remember any specific thing really about the book. I read the first couple chapters last night. And I have a vague recollection of the characters. In terms of like the details of the steaminess, I don't remember. Because they all kind of are the same.
Because I read Kushiel's Dart by Jack and Carey recently.
Really enjoyed. Yeah,
and that book is always talked about in terms of like its erotica nature, which like there's definitely explicitness in the book, but that was not like I did not find it that bad. Like I remember reading about this is not nearly what I was expecting.
This is, I mean, it's
obviously different, because that's like Kushiel's Dart is like a fantasy with romantic elements, but this is an all-out romance.
Emilyn, it's going to go into detail. Like it is explicit. There's no getting around that it's explicit. Steaminess, I think, is one of those things too that is, it depends on what does it for you. Like, let's all remember back. Oh God, what was that scene? The shaving scene?
Oh God, Rage of Dragons.
Right, where many of us could not. And I think in all of these, there's like, it's like Bridgerton. It's like whatever. It is explicit. It's on the page. It's talked about specifically what is happening where and when, and what you like. If you find it steamy, that will be like kind of a personal preference.
Okay.
Yeah.
The bathtub haircut.
The bathtub haircut. Yeah, like that also grossed me out. But I don't think we're going to get any of that. But I think there's a lot of it is explicit. There's no getting around the fact that there is explicit stuff happening on the page that you're going to read.
All right, I'm game.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I think like the characters are fun, and for people who think that romance, is degrading to women or something. I mean, Courtney Milan we chose, and we could have chosen a handful of others. I think a lot of romance is being written this way, where the women are the star and they're capable and they're maybe constrained. We're reading a historical romance. This is set in like 1863, I think we're starting in. So it's not Regency, it's Victorian, late Victorian, mid-Victorian. But women are constrained by society, but the women that feature in all of these books are smart. They're like, know their own business. They want to be independent in a lot of ways, but sometimes can't. And it's more about meeting a man who appreciates kind of the full person and not just, whoever at the ball they should be marrying kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to, and it'll be an interesting test. Like romance is one of those ones I wasn't sure we were going to read, to be honest, for the first little while. So I'm glad we're getting to it.
It's the best. It is. I think it is the best-selling genre of fiction, isn't it?
It wouldn't surprise me.
It's got to outsell almost everything.
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right. We've been going for about an hour.
Yeah.
Do we want to cut it?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Thank you guys for coming. I'm looking forward to the romance. I'm looking forward to seeing our reactions to steaminess.
Please post all of your thoughts in the Discord. We're going to want to know them all.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So talk to you guys in the Discord soon. I might try and start this one fairly soon, given the fact that it's so different from like all the other books that I would typically read, that I don't think having it going alongside some other reads is going to confuse me or anything.
No.
Anyway, yeah. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. It was a good live show.
Nice to talk to you guys.
So good to see everyone. Bye.
Bye.